and I show that it's 10 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and just start with introductions, and if people are continuing to join us, that's great. I am Catherine Moore, and I'm a member of our committee, our ad hoc committee that is responding to COVID. We have been working together to provide resources to get insight from our members so that we can kind of best understand how to help support school psychologists of Oklahoma. And so we've, as many of you know and have participated in, we've had several meetings this summer and at the end of the previous school year to collaborate. And so we're continuing with that today. Like I said, I'm Catherine Moore, and I'm a school psychologist currently working in a university setting at the OU Health Science Center. And I'll let our other committee members introduce themselves as well. So Sarah, you want to go ahead?
Hey, I am Sarah Rich. I work at OSU Center for Health Sciences as a school psychologist, and on the OSPA board, I am past president, and then obviously on this committee.
Okay, Trisha?
Hi, I'm Trisha Goga. I work for the Oklahoma State Department of Education as one of their crisis team school psychologists. And for OSPA, I am the treasurer-elect.
Okay, Erica?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Erica Ollinger. I'm also a crisis team school psychologist at OSDE, second cousin to Thor, and now delegate on the board.
All right, and Jackie, are you available?
Yes, I am. Sorry. I'm Jackie Johns. I'm in Colorado right now with my family, so I'm all masked up and everything. I apologize, but luckily I can still participate. I am a school psychologist at Collinsville Public Schools and also their district mental health coordinator and special education coordinator. And for OSPA, I am currently the president-elect.
All right, thanks. So Trisha, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, let's see. Wait till the slides come up. Okay, so we just have today's meeting, which we'll be talking about teleintervention, progress monitoring strategies for academics and behavior. We have some great speakers. I'm really excited to hear everyone speak. And then our last session or last meeting will be July 22nd. And that will address school reentry planning for school psychologists. And so if you or anyone you know have some really great ideas for what you guys plan on doing for coming back to school, we'd love to have some people volunteer to speak on that topic. If you are interested, please contact our OSPA communications email, which we'll provide in the chat. And then, other than that, the theme for that that meeting on the 22nd will be rock stars. So we're going to rock into this school year with some positivity. So, who is next? I've got Jackie.
Sorry. Okay. Sorry. Yes. So again, thank you everybody for being here and joining us, and just going over some rules quickly of the Zoom meetings. It looks like a lot of people already know what they're doing and they're typing their name and their position in the chat box. So thank you for doing that so that we know who all is here with us today. If you have any questions, feel free to chat those in the box as well. We'll be checking that periodically throughout. And I think that's it.
All right. So as Trisha mentioned, I'm really excited about the resources that we have to share with you, but we also want you guys to feel free to share resources that you've developed or you're thinking about developing, or you found other schools throughout, and chat those questions or chat links in the chat box so that we can all have access to those. And we are going to start with Lee Harris from Putnam City. He's going to give us some insight into some of the research that he did on progress monitoring in virtual settings, and he has some great resources that he found, and we will have access to those resources for you guys. You'll get an email sometime this week with a follow-up of a link to this video and those. And Lee, you should be able to share your screen if you need to do that.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. Hang on just a second, guys. Let me set this up. Okay. Thank you, Sarah. Like Sarah said, my name is Lee Harris. I'm currently a school psychologist for Putnam City at Hefner Middle School. I also serve on the district RTI committees for Putnam City. And prior to being a school psychologist, I was a special education teacher. So I've had experience with MTSS in the classroom, campus, and district levels. Putnam City, from what I've gathered, is not planning on being closed at the beginning of the school year. We plan to open as normal, but we are going to have plans in place to do seamless transitions to distance learning in the event that a site has to close due to a COVID-19 outbreak. So today I'm going to be talking to you about some of the virtual interventions and assessment strategies that I plan to share with our district RTI committees and some of the things that we've talked about as school psychologists in our meetings at Putnam City. A lot of the information I'm sharing is from a Florida State Department of Education document for how to implement MTSS in their virtual school settings. I felt like it was pretty pertinent to where we are now, since there's not a whole lot of guidance on that from Oklahoma State Department. So I figured that'd be a good place to kind of start off. That document is going to be available after the presentation. So one of the things they really drill home in the document is the importance of problem-solving teams. If your district is just getting started with RTI, or if you've already started and you don't have problem-solving teams, I highly recommend that you guys consider using them. A problem-solving team is a multidisciplinary team that gets together to decide what a student needs in the general education setting, how to address those needs with what intervention, and then to produce those positive outcomes within the general education setting. Of course, NASP has the problem-solving model for us. And so as school psychologists, we are uniquely qualified to help with these types of committees. So if you need more information on the NASP problem-solving model, you can find more at that link below. Planning and problem-solving teams, if you look at the makeup, looks kind of familiar. We are in teams like this a lot. The bare minimum for these teams would be the 3 in bold. And what I spoke on this at COSA earlier in the summer, and what I was kind of passing along is, hey, you know, school admin, you know, you have to send a lot of meetings. School psychologists are specifically trained for this. So if you don't have one on staff, now might be a good time to ask for one. So you can always invite other members like your speech pathologists or occupational therapists. It just depends on your school and what you're talking about in those meetings with students. There are going to be possible hurdles to moving to do things virtually. One of those things will be staff will need access to virtual meeting platforms, whether it be Zoom, Skype, Cisco WebEx. They will need unrestricted access to it. So I know Zoom's free meetings are 40 minutes. They'll need access to a full membership so that they can have as long as they need to. Teachers may also need access to multiple technology tools. So if they have a laptop and they're sharing their screen doing a progress monitoring probe, they're going to need something else like a tablet or an iPad to be able to score that. So there may be extra things that districts have to incur to do this virtually, but I think it's really important that we continue, especially if it's a kiddo we're concerned may need special education services. Virtual Tier 1, just like in traditional school, the curriculum should be meeting the needs of 80% of the population. For students that struggle to meet those benchmarks in a virtual setting, accommodations can be provided just like they are in the classroom. So additional time completing assignments, supplemental instruction programs. For example, at Putnam City, our middle schools have access to Reading Plus. And so a teacher, and if they couldn't do differentiated instruction, could assign a lesson in Reading Plus for the area the student is struggling in. You can also differentiate instruction. So you can, I know some teaching platforms allow teachers to pull groups of students aside virtually and do a reteaching group if they need to, or they can be scheduled outside of the typical meeting time. And also at virtual tier 1, just like traditional tier 1, if you're concerned, you can always start progress monitoring at this tier as well. For districts, I'm sorry, I'm kind of gearing this towards some districts that may need some ideas on getting it set up if they haven't already. So a lot of this you may already know, I'm sorry for that. For tier 2 and 3 virtually though, I know there's a lot of leeway in some districts for tier 2. Sometimes districts allow evidence-based approaches for tier 2. I recommend personally, if you're going to continue interventions virtually, that they be scientific research-based interventions. And the reason for that is because the activities in those interventions are usually highly structured and intensive, so it's going to maintain that attention. They're also usually scripted. So if they have both of those qualities and the teacher adheres to the protocol and does it with fidelity, you're probably going to get the same types of results that the researchers got in their studies, as long as we're doing it as with as much fidelity as possible. Also, just keep in mind that progress monitoring data, if you continue virtually, may need to be interpreted with some caution. Either if you know the scores drop or if scores go really high, you may want to compare them with data you had before or after the closure, just to verify that it's accurate. I know Micah is going to be talking a little bit more about virtual interventions later, so I'm going to let her talk to you about that here in just a minute. Some pros and cons to doing virtual interventions. I'd like to start with the cons. It could be difficult to maintain student engagement, specifically if you've got a student that may have some attention concerns or some hyperactivity behavioral concerns. So it's really important as school psychologists that we make sure our teachers first understand token economies, and second, have access to programs that would make it possible for them to do token economies virtually. I know there are some apps out there that teachers are already familiar with. They just may need some training on how to do that efficiently. You won't have any physical manipulatives unless you send it to the student ahead of time, or you have a program that provides those manipulatives they can use on their screen. So for example, if you're teaching place value with base 10 blocks, you're not going to have those. So it's important to keep that in mind when you're picking interventions. Home environment distractions can be a little bit different than school. Having little brother screaming in the other room because he hasn't gotten his cereal yet is a little bit different than somebody being distracted from someone walking by in the hallway through the door window. So just keeping those in mind. And then the level of support or assistance that a student may be receiving on an assessment. I'm going to talk to you later about how you might mitigate that. Some pros, though, to virtual interventions. You're no longer constrained by the campus schedule. So you have more time. So you can schedule at a time that's convenient for the student or teacher. The length of your sessions could be longer. You might have more time to work with those kids. And also how frequently those sessions happen. Sometimes in schools, I've had it happen where the way the schedule is, we only have 3 days a week to do an intervention. This could free much more time up for that. Your grouping flexibility. You may even have, with time being freed up, you may have time for individual interventions, specifically with that next bullet point. Or you could flex across your teams or even grade levels. If you're confined by the campus schedule and you've got a 5th grade teacher that really knows how to teach silent E, and you've got a 2nd grader that's struggling with that concept, in the virtual setting, you may say, hey, 5th grade teacher, can I send little Johnny over to you for some interventions next week on silent E? They'd probably say, yeah, sure, So that's an option that's typically not available to us. Also interventionist options. Title I teachers, EL teachers, instructional coaches, they're usually in school, they're confined by their own job responsibilities. If we have to transition to a virtual setting, they may have more time and we could use them as interventionists. So that's something to talk about school administration. Now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how virtual testing and screening may work. One of the things the Florida document talked about was verifiable student data. So making sure that the data that you're getting from assessments is valid. And basically what it means is just making sure that they're not getting extra help that they're not supposed to get on tests. So how do you do that? Florida recommended their virtual schools do in-person testing. Of course, if we're closed due to a pandemic, that's not going to be possible. And so that's where verifying that data with test data from before a closure or after a closure may be beneficial, or you could talk to your district about setting up virtual testing sites or virtual testing rooms. This is something I'm going to float to my district when our committee first meets. I feel like it's probably the most feasible option. So we can take our cue on how these testing rooms would work from professional testing centers. So show of hands, how many of you have taken a certification test? So we can take our cue from them, right? You show up, you sign in, you're assigned a computer, and then while you're sitting there, you're monitored via CCTV cameras. The virtual testing rooms could work the same way using a meeting platform. So they log into the virtual testing room via the platform. Then they log into their testing platform. So for example, in Putnam City, we use AimsWeb Plus for our benchmarks and progress monitoring. It's all online. So they would log into the TestNav app on their iPad. And then the teacher could have 10, 15 kids on their computer and monitor them while they're taking the benchmark assessment. That's going to really help with that verifiable student data. So pros and cons to our testing rooms. Pros, again, that scheduling flexibility. The kids can take the test when it's convenient for them or when a teacher is available. It does provide a semi-formal, semi-familiar testing setting for students. So semi-formal being that you have a time that you log in and you take the test being observed, just like they normally would in the classroom. And it's also semi-familiar because if they've been using things like AimsWeb in the classroom, they're already used to taking the test on their iPad. And they're already used to the teacher being available to watch them take the test. So it really wouldn't be much different. And then the efficiency factor. In the traditional classroom where we're taking tests, we have to wait for everybody to get done and be quiet. They don't have to do that in a virtual testing room. When they're done, they can log off and learning can continue, or they can go on if they finish their work with the rest of their day. Of course, there's always going to be technical issues when it comes to virtual testing rooms. Your webcam view is limited. So as of right now, if I turn this down, you can see what I'm doing here. But if it's up and you're watching me, you can't see what my hands are doing. So you don't know if I've got another device on the side using my calculator. You can't monitor every student's screen. And what I mean by that is not through the meeting platform, but on their actual device. In our schools in Putnam City, we can monitor what they're doing on their iPads. That may not be possible if you're using this type of setting. And of course, just being aware that scores may drop due to that change in settings. So again, just verifying that data and making sure that it's accurate and valid. There are lots of benchmarking and progress monitoring options out there. If you're just getting started, this list right here on the top is the list of approved benchmark and or progress monitoring systems approved for RSA. Some do just benchmarks like STAR. Some do just may do just progress monitoring like EasyCBM. Some do both, AimsWeb and DIBELS. All of the programs except for Acadience have online testing options. Some of the programs are completely online like AimsWeb Plus or DIBELS or FAST. And for programs like Acadience, if you don't have a digital option, you're going to have to make sure that you can have the testing materials digitized. So first you'll have to get permission from the company to make sure it's okay to do that. Then it'll have to be done in a non-editable file type, like a PDF. And if you have an assessment where kids have to submit responses, you'll have to make sure that that PDF has answer boxes available, like on a math test. And that's going to be very difficult to do and time consuming. So I hope this is kind of giving you some jumping off points if you're getting started or figuring out how to transition seamlessly to virtual MTSS. And I'm going to turn it over to Micah, and she's going to share with you some of her experiences with implementing interventions virtually.
Hi, good morning. Before I dive in, I would like my attempt at being super noted. I was able to find a Superman cape, one defunct Spider-Man glove, and Clark Kent's glasses, but I can't see if I actually wear them. But sort of super is how I'm feeling this morning. You know, to bounce off what Lee was saying, I've been trying to take that information and package it in a usable way for teachers. And so I've been focused on trying to prepare a way really for them to feel empowered that, yes, intervention can continue. It's the same interventions, maybe with some slight modifications, but it's really a logistics thing. It's about connectivity, and it's about figuring out how to make it happen. And so I envision, I don't have it ready yet, but I've got everything on individual slides right now, but I am envisioning like a one-page document front and back for teachers and one for parents. And I'm intending for it to address things like things that you need to think ahead, you know, kind of Lee addressed it in his pros and cons slide a little bit, but things that you need to think about ahead of time so that your connectivity, you know, your intervention time can go smoothly. But things like scheduling, what is your connectivity and equipment options? What's the best way to communicate with parents? You know, if that's phone, if that's text, if that's email, communicating expectations, you know, during intervention and during progress monitoring, staffing, which is something that's going to have to be worked out, you know, district by district, building by building, who is going to deliver the interventions. You know, I'm not an administrator, but I'm sure they're thinking of things like contracts and time and who, you know, the people who, in my experience, were often delivering those tier 2 and tier 3 interventions. Their contracts are different than, you know, many teachers. So I know that that's something that administrators will need to, you know, be working out so that we can train the proper people to do this remotely. And then materials, you know, during the closing, you know, many schools really provided materials for students to, you know, when we shut down in an emergency situation, but, you know, there were packets available, and some of that was just copies of work, but I know many districts sent scissors and glue and, you know, base 10 blocks, whatever they needed. And I think that that's something that we could, you know, package up for interventions, you know, specific interventions. So I'm envisioning that to be an editable document so that we can modify it for each situation. And then on the back of that document, I would like to have, I piloted this like, okay, repeated readings. We say we can do that remotely. How does that actually go down? So I did it with my daughter when we were still in the closing and just made a step-by-step, you know, protocol for how to do it. You know, how to log on and how to screen share and all of that, which many of us have become pretty proficient at. Different teachers and different parents are going to have different levels of knowledge on that, but that can also be an editable document. So when we know, you know, are they using Zoom? Are they using Google Classroom? You know, what are their materials and what are their internet programs that we're using? We can make that editable. So, you know, when it's intervention time, each teacher and each parent will have those guidelines for doing it. And I'm happy to share that. I don't have it prepped yet, but I'm happy to share that so that you guys can edit it for your districts and your teachers too. The other thing, I was so excited that the RSA meeting was yesterday because I'm like, I'll have guidance to share at OSPA. And my guidance is RSA is working on it. You know, the guidelines for, as Lee mentioned there, many of the approved assessment programs have online options, and RSA is going through those, and they will be making their recommendations for us. So I'm very anxious to get, you know, all of us to get our hands on that, but just know that it is coming soon.
And Micah, will you talk a little bit about, I think you're, in the professional development you're doing with teachers right now, you're advising them on if they are back in person and they can do kind of traditional academic screenings of how to look at that data and considerations that they need to make sure they're considering with looking at that data.
Yes, I think that we are all expecting students are going to be behind. When we do have that fall benchmark data, it's probably not going to look as lovely as we would hope. We're going to have more students at risk, that higher base rate of risk. And so, to address that, if 80% of the kids need it, that's not a tier 2 situation. We can address that more efficiently at tier 1. And so I am, encouraging teachers to, when we're looking at that data, if we see what we're expecting, to apply class-wide intervention and monitor. And then we'll see who's catching up, who's responding to that class-wide intervention, and who is not, who's not. And those students will likely be candidates for the tier 2 intervention.
Perfect. And I think that's probably something that as school psychologists we understand, but we need to make sure we're clearly communicating that to the teachers, that just like always, if we have a large majority of students below level, we're not going to just assume that they all need tier 2 level intervention. And as a class and school wide, we might need to be doing some tier 1 remediation because of that, because of the situation, not because of anyone's fault for that.
Right.
Absolutely. Before we move on to Kyle and Kim sharing about Edmond, anyone have any questions or comments or information for Lee or Micah or the group as a whole? All right, I'm gonna turn over to Kyle and Kim to talk about Edmond and the resources that they've pulled together for their teachers during the spring and kind of how they're thinking about plans for the future, whatever the situation might look like. So you guys can go ahead.
Okay, hi, I'm Kim Hastings and I work in tandem with Kyle Allen. I'm the elementary RTI instructional facilitator for Edmond. And Kyle, you want to say your title?
Yeah, I'm secondary RTI instructional specialist for Edmond Public Schools. So Kim and I get to work a lot together, which is nice for me.
Of course, during the spring distance learning period, we put together a digital dashboard for all core resources from the curriculum department. And so included in that, we also linked we called it extra support for students. And so in that, we decided to design it for parents in my child is struggling with X, I need to work on this. And so it was very much an intervention library, but it was designed for parents to be able to navigate appropriately. And we were kind of blind going into it, and we just put it out there and we had no idea what the response would be. And we were in a meeting a couple weeks ago and a teacher spoke to us about, I really used it for parents to be even to challenge and the other side of the pyramid, which we always feel like we're talking about the low side and bringing kids up, but very rarely I feel like, are we really addressing the high side, which I was happy that that teacher took that initiative. So I'm going to share my screen and also post the link of what we provided and let Kyle talk about it.
Okay. So as you guys can see, and just to note, all of this is available to anyone in any district. And so we had got word that there were other districts that were utilizing a lot of our resources, much like we utilized resources from other places as well. So I just want to make sure everybody understands that if anybody ever wanted to borrow any of these resources, that absolutely can be done. Kim, like she said, will share the link. And so this will be available to you guys immediately. One thing Kim and I certainly feel like as we move forward and progress into this next school year, you know, like she said, we had a week to kind of throw this together. So we will certainly try to update it and make it smoother and just a better process for everyone involved. One thing I just want to say initially is, so much like Lee said, and I have to say, and Kim knows I talk too much, but I just appreciate listening to Lee speak because, and just the work he's done, because I, much like other school psychs, probably felt down and out when a lot of this happened, because it's funny, you know, we suddenly had to figure out how to do tier 1 in this virtual world. And so I found myself feeling like, gosh, you know, tier 2 and tier 3 has just kind of gotten this back seat, because everybody now is just trying to figure out, well, how do we even provide tier 1 instruction? And I think Lee does an awesome job of, you know, making this all seem like it's so doable. So I appreciate you, Lee. I had to add that. So anyway, you're welcome, Lee. Much like Putnam City, we also use Ames Web Plus, which we have found has been very beneficial in this process of moving to virtual learning. Like Lee said, a lot of it's available digitally. And so it does make, you know, aligning interventions, progress monitoring, much of those things, you know, easier to provide in a virtual world. And so in saying that, you can see we've aligned on the page here our skills to our Ames Web Plus assessment. So if you're familiar with Ames Web Plus, you can assess early math, early literacy and reading, math, or reading. And so we really wanted to, for parents, much like we do for our teachers, really provide skill-specific interventions for where their students and or children are struggling and where they're behind, and where we have data that supports that that their students are behind. And so Kim, I don't know if you want to click on any of these, but obviously the idea is the parent, you know, is communicating with the teacher, and teachers letting parent know that, you know, this is where we were at, this is where we were working. And so you can see Kim's clicked on the early literacy piece. And so depending on, you know, where we were working in the school, providing tier 2 interventions, we have several options here to, you know, go in and find different types of interventions. A lot of these interventions were things, you know, like ABC Mouse, things that, you know, are pretty well known. We also provided, you know, specific interventions that a teacher might do in a classroom, even on a small group or individual basis, if technology will cooperate here. So, you know, we use Fold In a lot at the elementary level, even sometimes up to the middle school level. And so we tried to provide the directions, as you can see here. Also tried to provide any type of materials. So something to go along with to help a parent at home be able to reproduce what was happening there at school. And so you can see Kim here scrolling and showing you some of those materials that were provided. Again, you could certainly scroll through this, you know, try to look at some of the resources that are available. I don't know how many we want to actually go over. I will say another challenge to this, and Kim sort of alluded to this, is, you know, again, we were just kind of rushed into throwing this all together. And I think Kim and I wondered often, you know, I wonder how many people are utilizing this. And so, as Kim said, it was encouraging to hear from a teacher in a meeting last week that, you know, she used it on a very regular basis. And that made me feel like maybe RTI hasn't been completely shunned in this virtual world. But I will say too, and just being completely honest, we did talk to teachers that had no idea that this was available. And so one thing that Kim and I are working on now is our back to school training. And this is part of something that will, you know, heavily be emphasized, is, you know, just letting teachers know that this is available. And so again, if we have to go to a virtual type of learning, situation, then hopefully, teachers could utilize it as much as they can, but also that it could be communicated home with parents. And really, obviously, the idea is just hoping that, we don't have to completely drop tier 2 supports, and so that's the gist of it. The other thing that we have going on, and we don't really have any good way to share this, but Kim and I have been providing training for telepractice, which is just that idea of virtual progress monitoring. And so that's just something else that Kim and I have really been working on a lot through the spring. And then obviously in the fall, we'll have to roll it out to all teachers. This past spring, we really just focused on our students on IEPs. But in the fall, we're really going to try to have all teachers be able to continue to progress monitor even if we move into a virtual world. So Kim, what did you want to add?
I was just going to clarify, the telepractice is Pearson's or Ames Webb's launch of how to deliver it virtually. So just so you're aware of what that means.
Yeah.
And of course, they're a testing company and they tried to meet the need. And they did the best job they could. It's not easy. I wouldn't, there's a lot of work to it, but it definitely meets a need. So that was encouraging.
Yeah. I will say too, and Lee again did a great job of talking about, all these different resources that, I know our school districts across the state utilize, different progress monitoring tools. And so I think, the information Lee shared, there's a great resource, but I would encourage any districts that utilize Ames Web Plus. And so Lee, we probably need to get together and talk more than we do, but I don't know what other districts in the state utilize Ames Web Plus, but I know Kim and I have dived really deep, not just, with everything that happened in the spring, but just all of last year. But if anybody would need assistance with, this idea of how do we progress monitor in a virtual world, Kim and I have certainly put together lots of resources for our teachers, just to try to help facilitate that if we have to move to virtual at some point in the fall. So just wanted to encourage anyone to reach out to either of us if that happens.
Thank you so much. Kim, do you want to talk, I'm kind of switching gears a little bit about the social emotional part? And I know that's not necessarily specific to the distance learning, but I think because of all the situations, it sounds like Edmond, it's opened up an opportunity for Edmond to look more into that. So what have those discussions been?
So we are definitely really at the beginning of all of this and for behavior. And we have been talking and building committees even before COVID about trying to meet student mental health needs beyond, taking a PBIS model and adding that mental health component. And luckily we've, a year ago, our district hired a, what's her title? She's over the counselors, basically is what she's equal to us, Kyle and I, in that we're able to work together. And what was previously directed by associate superintendents or executive directors now is being funneled through her first, which is nice because we can now link arms and work closely together. The one thing that we have gotten at least the groundwork going is to truly screen for behavior. I think many of us have participated in Dr. Riffle's trainings over the years and different Otis things and et cetera. And we've never really gotten that ball rolling very well. We've used tiers for behavior, but we've never done district-wide screening. And I finally sold it this year, or this summer. And so next fall we'll be screening for behavior for elementary. and then hopefully that lays some groundwork for Kyle at secondary. And so we're really I feel like we should be further, but hey, that's the way it works. We're just trying to take a piece at a time. And so we'll be utilizing the SSRS tool because one thing that was really important to me and the whole mental health committee was not only looking at externalizing behaviors, but those internalizing as well. Because I feel like those ones are the ones that really sneak by us and we lose sight of sometimes. So we're just biting off that, and we haven't even told administrators yet. So we'll be launching that in the fall. So.
Awesome. And we will, we mentioned a link to some free screener information, I think in our first session, but we'll make sure to have that one up there as well. And the SSRS, which is it's free. It's pretty easy for teachers to use. It's a screener, so it's not going to give you a whole lot of, in-depth information, but it's at least that temperature check. And then that's so important as kids are returning to school that we have that consideration. I'm going to do, let's see, Kyle, are you sharing your screen?
I am, I'll stop.
Okay, and Kim, I don't know which one. Before we move on to talking a little bit more about the behavior and the social emotional piece, I'm going to put up a poll just to kind of gauge where people are as far as what your schools are planning this year. There's an other option. So if you do have an other, if you don't mind kind of chatting in the box what that other is, so we kind of get an idea of that. And also, as you're doing that, if you'll be thinking about, I would love to hear from other people, what have the conversations been at your school? What, has RTI just kind of, like Kyle was saying, been put to the side and no one's even talking about it? Are you guys still trying to figure it out? What does that look like for your schools? Getting the bits in. So we've got most votes. We have a few more coming in. Does anyone want to share what's going on at their school and what the considerations have been? I'm going to call on Michelle Lauren to talk about BA. I think it's kind of similar to what other people have been doing, but I just like those large districts, that's quite a bit to consider. And so Michelle's in a position there with the RTI coordination that she can speak to that though.
It is pretty similar to what several of the others have already talked about. I'm also diving into how do we assist teachers if we have short-term closures or students are participating in our increasing opportunities of virtual school and what that might look like. We discovered over the closure that we have a whole lot of technology gaps with our teachers. I worked a lot teaching teachers how to use technology. Which is not what I was expecting to spend my time doing. So broken arrow with our instructional specialists. I'm going to share one thing real quick. At elementary, have trained our teachers to be really good at opening a Google Doc and then clicking on links. Going to Google Drive and doing all of those things was much more than a lot of them could do. So I've taken all of our RTI documents and put it in a similar fashion to what they're used to with accessing some of the materials from the instructional specialists. We are still working to grow our resources, but we've got our tier 2 interventions that are available to them, and then what I want them doing when they're in tier 3.
we are in flux between assessments. So right now, last year we used Easy CBM, which I have some struggles with. And we've renewed our contract with STAR, who's come out with some CBM materials that look promising. So I'm going to be playing around with those and seeing what we can do with that. One thing about the STAR stuff, they were norming it last year when everything went virtual. So they do have some digital norms in a way that most of the other ones do not, as far as that distance learning component. So we'll see if that comes out in September like it's supposed to, and then how we build that into what we're doing. As far as what, I can't find my stop sharing screen button. The other thing that I'm trying to work out is like a protocol for how do we continue tier 3 and progress monitoring if a student needs to go virtual or a class is closed or a site is closed. And so we'll move, I'm waiting to get some guidelines from administration on that before I can finalize all of that.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I think it's just helpful to see kind of how, like, we're all thinking similarly, but applying it a little bit differently. And you're completely right, Michelle. I've spent so much more of my career doing technology skills help than I ever thought I would. But that's a lot of times that's step one. And when, you know, this first happened, everyone was concerned about students' technology, which is still a concern, their access. But I think as far as figuring things out, the students are usually pretty good on that end, and the teachers might need that. Or some teachers, like, I mean, when this started, my internet hardly worked and I had to up my internet, and there's a lot of technology issues with that as well. So
yes,
I'm gonna share. So this poll, it looks like the winner, not by a lot, is most people are doing, at least for what you guys know, because I know everyone's still in flux, but a lot of districts are doing that choose, so parents could choose if they're virtual or in person. Only one, I'm surprised because I've actually heard this a little bit, but that like having 1 or 2 days a week in that virtual setting just to kind of keep that virtual maintenance. And then a lot of people are kind of moving forward, it seems like, with COVID, which I guess this is a small sample across the state, but we had, you know, some other people talking about, I think Lee, you guys said you guys were talking about that, having maybe 1 day a week to kind of keep that virtual fluency in that transition period. Norman's still developing their plans. It seems like one option might be full-time with 8 digital days throughout the year. So almost like school day or snow days, but they're doing digital days, trying to figure that piece out. And then I love, Natalie, you mentioned up here that this is like, it's a really great time to start having these conversations about if your district is discrepancy, moving to an RTI district. And I mean, that's always probably the discussions that we're pushing forward and looking at that, but now it's even more complex. And so there's, I think Lee did a great job of pointing out some of the great pros to doing MTS virtually and the flexibility. And I think there were a lot of things that we saw in the spring that people said you just can't do that, and all of a sudden you could do them. And so, and even I think we can still apply some of that to when we're all in person, hopefully in the fall as well. So I think there's a lot of flexibility there. Anyone else want to kind of comment on those or other ideas? Do me waiting. All right. Kim, were you going to say something?
I was just going to, I don't know if this is encouraging to me, because we, like many districts, are thinking through the 3 options, like in person, blended, and then sole virtual. And I kind of like the blended model. I think that would really free up a lot of time for our teachers to be able to administer an intervention and progress monitoring much more than in person does, because like Micah said, they're not bound by that. There's a more freedom because their class size is a lot smaller. I initially thought, oh God, this is going to be awful, but thinking about that kind of encouraged me. So
great. And that's my point. Like, we're all in this together. And again, I think we all have very similar goals, but coming at those at a different perspective and then trying to work within our districts. I'm going to shift gears a little bit more to talk about kind of the behavior side. And as challenging as the academic side, I think some of the behavior stuff might be more challenging. When this first started, I work with a grant from the State Department where we have coaches that are helping train schools on implementing the tiered supports, kind of like Kim was describing, where we have the PAPIS core components, but then we're really trying to focus more holistically on the social emotional pieces and that mental health components as well. But our schools in that grant are still, they were developing tier 1 this year. So they were very much tier 1 PBIS. And when this hit, I just shut down. I was like, well, they're not even going to want to talk to us. They're not, I mean, kind of like Kyle was saying, with RTI is going to get pushed to the side. And I was just assuming that those teams didn't want to talk to us. Those teams didn't care about planning for next year. Like, they're focused on their tier 1 academic side, and who cares about PBIS? And we kind of proceeded like that for the first few weeks. And I think it was just sort of crisis response. And then I talked to one of our coaches who had meetings with her schools, and I was blown away with how those schools had adapted their PBIS principles to the virtual setting just like that. And I was like, oh yeah, in a crisis, we should keep doing what we know works. We might have to adapt it, but if we know something works, we should keep doing it. And it was so refreshing to see that. And so one of my favorite things, and I don't have access to this video or else I would show it to you guys, but one of the principals filmed her dog doing the new COVID precautions. And so she filmed her dog. She's like, you have to still get out of bed in the morning. And so she filmed her dog getting out of bed in the morning. And then we all have to wear our mask. And so she put a little mask on her dog and like put her dog at the computer. So it was really like a cute way. And then that principal sent that out to all the parents and teachers so that they could show their students. So that's demonstrating our behavioral expectations. What does it look like in this new world, in kind of a cute, fun way that they could all see it, which I was like, that's it. That's what it's about. Since all of this started, there's been some really good resources published by the PBIS Technical Assistance Center that's funded through the Office of Special Education Programs. And so I just wanted to screen share a couple of those things to show you, and then we'll email out all those resources so you can see it. Let me pull those up. Get this. So the first one, and I'm just going to show you sort of what it looks like. I won't read to you guys. Is this creating a PBIS behavior matrix for teaching in that remote instruction. So if you are still going to have some remote instruction days, or you're going to have half of your school doing virtual learning, then this might be something that you work with your teachers on. What are our behavioral expectations for that setting? And so it's just like we have hallway expectations, we're going to have virtual expectations. And they have some great resources on here, but they have examples. So for example, we are entering class virtually. We're in a distraction-free environment. We have all of our equipment. We're still using kind words and faces. And you add in about how to chat in. You keep your video on at all times, but your audio off. All of these things that you just have to consider if you're doing that virtual distance like tele-type setting and what that would look like. There's another example on this document. Again, they've taken their PBIS matrix and they have distance learning and technology. And then they also have this isn't an actual link I can click, but it looks like they have set up a form that teachers can report students who are exhibiting pride. So they still have some sort of acknowledgement system. And so I think it is like a, probably goes to like a Google form, and then they can do a random drawing of that. One of the schools that is on our project, they ended up doing that, and they would still do like Facebook Live shout outs to students who were exhibiting the behaviors on their school specific Facebook group. And so they were able to still make those announcements, give acknowledgements. I think they might have mailed like a little something to some of the students that got their name drawn. So there were still things they could do that fit within that. So again, doing what we know works and just adapting it to those settings. The other one that I think is really helpful for us, especially our population that we tend to work with, is they came up with one for supporting students with disabilities at school and home in this. So really this is pretty parent friendly to help them understand what resources there are for teaching in this setting. And again, I'll kind of break it down, but they give you teacher tips, then they give family tips, and then they give some resources of things, and they have it broken down into different categories. So this one's about kind of the teaching procedures, and then we have one about instructional strategies. So talking, like Lee was saying, using those scripted instructional lesson plans that we know work, let's stick to that. Making sure parents understand there's plenty of time to practice. If they do need more intensive or targeted, they provide some information there, and then they actually provide some links to other resources that might even be some of the resources that you guys have already found. But these are just nice little handouts and ways that you can teach your teachers as well as your families on how to provide that instruction. And then the last one that is more recent that they came out with is returning to school after a crisis, and just things, what does our MTSS look like after we've had this pause, and what are things that we need to consider? And honestly, I think you guys have already done a great job explaining a lot of those things that we need to consider for the MTSS, and Lee did an excellent kind of overview of that process. But this is just a nice handout that talks about kind of puts it in the context of, we need to make sure we're still connecting with everyone, we're screening, we're supporting our teachers, our families, and our students. So we're supporting at all levels. We're teaching the things that need to be taught, and that doesn't mean just teaching students, like Michelle was pointing out. That means maybe teaching our teachers how to use technology. It might be teaching how to do interventions to people who have never done interventions before, that piece of it. And then of course we monitor, and then we kind of keep going through that problem solving process. And you'll notice a lot of these things end up looking like the problem solving process. But I like it, again, they kind of break it down into, here are some practices that support these things. We know, helping teachers be really positive when they come back, but also those social emotional screeners, making sure we really monitor for those and do some wellness checks with our students when we see them again, because we have students that it's hard enough to transition from summer back into school, and now we're transitioning from a really long break back into a school that's going to look very different. And so there's a lot of transition issues that some kids are going to be really resilient and do it, and they're going to be fine, but helping our teachers recognize signs of kids that may need more help with that process. So I will link all of those for you guys, or we'll send it out in an email so you have access to all of those. And there's more stuff coming out all of the time, but those were three of the ones that I thought were most helpful for the situation that we're in right now. Excuse me. And Michelle, you linked a few things to Broken Arrow kind of updated. Do you want to give a quick summary of what you put on there?
Are you talking about the Stanford?
Yeah.
Okay, so Stanford University has really social emotional content for free for teachers and administrators, and I believe it goes pre-K through 6. I played around with it a lot during the closure and threw it out to a lot of people to look at. But it's really robust as far as what they provide. There's lessons, there's content. It'd be easy to use in a virtual fashion or a digital fashion. There's also resources to send home too. So, and you don't have to pay for it.
Yeah, Same First Harmony is nice because it does align with, if you're familiar with the castle, it aligns with those domains. And so if you have a screener that actually looks at the castle domains, then you can link the lessons and resources for that. The other thing I wanted to show you, really because it's so cute, she doesn't have all the content in yet, but a school counselor that I worked with, she has set up her shell for her Campbell's corner. So this is Leanne Campbell. So this is going to be her little counseling corner for this school district. And so she's anticipating that they're going to need to be able to have access to SEL lessons online. And so she's going to take some of her SEL lessons and then put them on a Google Classroom format, which is what I think a lot of counselors ended up doing for that social emotional learning part in the spring. Her little animation's adorable. So she's getting in there to be ready for her classroom, but she's going to be able to post assignments, post little videos, and she can do like little activities like based off the video or based off the lesson, and then assign things for students to do that day. Like if it's sharing, go share something with a student and then report back about it. So that's another thing that I think a lot of, for that social emotional tier 1 piece, that a lot of schools are transitioning to, is having some, using their learner management system, whether it's Google Classroom or some other system, to provide those social emotional supports.
Sarah, this is Erica. And another thing I just wanted to add, not to put more things on the to-do list per se, but one of the things that some of the folks at OSDE and the Office of Student Support, and Tricia and I are two people who are working on this, is also just a little out of the box, but PBS is appropriate for staff and teachers too. And so we're looking at screeners that districts could use, sort of just to take a temperature of what is the emotional readiness of teachers, because we're all being asked to do more things and do them in different ways, ourselves included. So when I say staff, it wouldn't just be for teachers, it might also be for school psychologists and cafeteria workers and support staff. Really, and traditionally, it's not the role to treat the mental health needs of staff and school psychologists in the schools. Otherwise, all of us would be on behavior plans. No, that's not what I mean. But it was, I think, particularly for those of you in administrative roles, it will be important to think about staff mental health and readiness, because of course the pandemic has affected them too. And are there ways from an administrative role, not necessarily, to treat it in a tier 3 format, but what are some tier 1 things that we can do to help teachers? And several of you have already identified technology needs as kind of a tier 1 strategy that we might need to be thinking of, but also are there other cultural things, other environmental things, other health related types of activities that we can provide, or services that we can provide to our staff to increase their willingness? Because of course, if we can design the best systems for students, and if we don't have staff who are in a place to develop those, we won't necessarily see the outcomes that we want. And so we've been working on that, and we'll continue to do so. And we hope before most of the schools start back in August to at least have some ideas for some potential kind of tier 1 screeners, if you will, to help identify some staff needs as well.
Thank you, Erica. And I just like a huge shout out to, I know Lee started, he talked about, he really promoted why you need a school psychologist during the COSA lesson. And it's so, I just feel like COVID has made it so clear that schools need school psychologists. And I really love the perfect timing of Tricia and Erica being part of the support services at the OSDE right before this, because I think they I think they're recognizing the huge asset of school psychology to developing and really working through these situations. So I just want to give a shout out to all of us and our superpowers and the great things that everyone's doing, because it's really, again, trying to look for the silver lining of all of this frustration. As there's a lot of opportunity, and I think as a group we're getting a lot more visibility, which we needed in this state.
Great. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to all of our contributors. I am in agreement that this has been kind of an opportunity to try to acknowledge the challenges that we're facing, but also see kind of the incredible innovation of our school psychologists in our state, and to kind of have more opportunities to come together. I know that's kind of been a side effect of increasing our use of a virtual format, is that we can actually meet together with more people than we would normally, and maybe more often, because we're not having to drive places or clear our schedule as much as we would have had to otherwise. So I'm thankful for this opportunity, and thankful for everyone who's been participating and sharing different ideas. And so with some of our remaining time, we just want to open up the floor if anyone would like to have it, whether it's to kind of share any additional resources or ideas related to our topic today, or whether it's a question for any of our contributors, or maybe it's just a general question that you have on your mind, or that relates to our next topic of school reentry, which is, we have a lot of questions about, but if there's anything specific that you would really like to see addressed in our next meeting, you can share that either in the chat box, or anyone can take the floor.
And I'm going to ask more specifically, because we don't have really a lot, we haven't specified exactly what we're going to talk about for the next meeting other than school reentry, but what are the pressing issues? Like, we want to know from you guys, like what information are you just like, no one's talking about this, or I need more information on that. So what do you need from us as your crisis committee here?
Some of the things that have come up for us through the psychologist and the speech path is maybe some ideas on how to, Broken Arrow is big on assessment, which is not my game, but trying to fix that. So kind of that PPE piece of, like, we've got speech path asking for plexiglass, and I think that is, maybe there's a different way that we can go about problem solving some of those social distancing pieces. And if we can just compile some resources together to address that. The other thing is, how do they plan to continue to use all the new virtual tools that we've now learned how to use? How are we going to continue to use those moving forward? I've really thought about, like, observations. If we could find a way to video into a classroom, then we would really get to see what happens in the classroom, because we change that environment when we go in.
That's excellent. Yeah, all of that. Again, let's let this situation transform us for the better, so that we're able to utilize tools that we didn't even know existed, or had kind of maybe had some issues with before, and how do we use those. So excellent. Yeah, and the PPE, it looks like someone else was asking about that, of just physical safety of doing our jobs. That's definitely part of it. What other questions or things have you guys thought about?
We started a conversation this week specifically regarding, it's kind of related to the PPE discussion, but more about designing a protocol for how we handle assessments. So just even thinking about when I'm giving a student the block design, and how I give the blocks and I have them I have a protocol and how I keep it safe in all of that. And so we had some really great ideas this week, and we're definitely at a rough draft period right now, but just continuing that discussion because there were things I hadn't even thought about.
Yeah, Kim, if you could finish that up in 2 weeks and then share it all with us, that'd be great.
I'll do my best.
Also, and if you can say it to the group or you can private chat to Sarah or to me, but it just dawned on me that perhaps some of you might need some technology needs. Like I'm the person who's always texting somebody, how do you open this thing again? Or where do I save this? So I'll be transparent to say that my technology skills have been tested. So if there's something specific that this committee can do to help with that, just chat that in too, and we're happy to provide technology support to school psychologists and different platforms that we're aware of. So just another idea.
Lee says it's usually him that Erica's calling.
Erica, I'm going to make you feel really good about yourself. Are you ready? Do you know how to cut and paste? And do
Yes,
you know
that
what
I can do with shortcut keys. I've been doing that for a long time. I can shortcut that, baby.
You know the difference between the right mouse button and the left mouse button?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Like you are
Barely.
light years ahead of
the only committee member that can't figure out a background, for example, right? Like,
but you know how to work a computer.
yes, that I can do.
People that don't know how to do that.
Yeah, that I can do. And yes, Lee's correct. It's usually Lee that I'm calling for that support. He can totally call me out. It's true.
I just have a general question, something to think about, I guess. I was interested in this meeting today because of the progress monitoring component of it, which seems to be a big topic with all across the board right now. Are there any suggestions for progress monitoring for behavior? I know it was mentioned a screener tool for behavior. Does that have any like before and after components, or if I don't know if anyone could speak to that or not?
So I'll start, but some of you guys may have some more information and thoughts on this. So the screener, usually the way those work is that they're like a ratings from the teacher. So the teacher kind of rates the student on several variables, and then you identify which areas are of concern. As far as progress monitoring, you could repeat those to see if those scores go down. But usually with behaviors, we want to progress monitor on, well, even with academics, the specific skill that we're targeting for that behavior. And so it's going to vary quite a bit from student to student of what we're monitoring there. Are you thinking in a virtual format, or are you thinking just kind of in general for behaviors?
In general.
In general,
in
yeah.
general. Because
So,
I know we're I just retired from Ardmore teaching special ed, and I've also worked as a diagnostician in Texas and taught in Alaska. So I'm just trying now to keep up for my own information. The progress monitoring has turned out to be very time consuming for special ed teachers. And I know it was frustrating in a way for some of these things that the data that we're asked to collect. And if you're in inclusion settings, it's sometimes even harder because you have to rely on the classroom teachers to help you with that. So there's just a lot involved in that. And I just wonder if there are any ideas how to make it easier. It's like,
yeah, Lee is holding up his hand, and I'm happy to turn that over to him.
So one thing that I'm planning on working on this month is taking all of my data collection sheets that I usually give teachers and digitizing them. So for example, if we're going to do a check-in, check-out with a student with excuse me, I just lost my whole train of thought. If we're going to do a check-in, check-out with a student with attention maintained behaviors, then the idea would be that I share a Google form with the teacher for that student. And then each day, because I'm in a middle school setting, I can send it to all of their teachers. And then the teachers can just do that quick form on their iPad that they're usually carrying around with them. So that's one of the ways I'm trying to help with the data collection and progress monitoring piece is making it as digital and as accessible to teachers on the fly as possible.
Sounds like a great suggestion. Yeah, because I know when we hand them checklists, you know, papers to fill out, they get lost, buried under a lot of other things, and we have to remember to go back and collect them. So thank you for that suggestion. It sounds great. Good idea.
And then
And I think
As soon as I get it set up, I'll see if I can figure out some way to share it with you guys and give you a jumping off point.
Okay, thank you, Lee. Very helpful.
did you have something, Sarah? Or it was maybe Kim. Go ahead.
And this was more for our tier 3 kiddos that were receiving moderate behavior support this over the distance learning time. I know they were specifically working on a very similar rating form to be able to collect data, much like Lee just talked about, but the parent was filling it out. And so that was one option that we were considering.
Good idea. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I think that really is when we're talking about our virtual format, that's really been the challenge is the kids still have behavioral needs, but they're going to look different in the home environment. And what does that look like? So I don't know if a lot of people have figured that out. I do think I've seen some like check-in, check-out virtual adoptions that I'll find the resource to that and send you guys. But in general, those kind of rating forms. And then Michelle put a link to, there's a resource out of California where they have just behavior ratings that they could do weekly to help with that. And I'll make sure that that's included in the resources as well.
Okay, thank you so much. That was very helpful. I always get good ideas from these meetings. Yeah, so it's obvious that the school psychologist's success depends on the rest of the team, doesn't it? We're linked with a lot of people here.
Yeah, it truly is a team effort, and it really, I think the success of everyone depends on everyone's input, and I really appreciate you being here from that special ed perspective of trying to figure out the progress monitoring.
And I have a couple, this is Jackie here. Sorry, I'm finally piping in. I have a couple things that some of my teachers I worked with at the end of last year kind of worked on some Google Docs and Google Sheets of some behavior monitoring that they were doing. They were having the parent do it. And then our hope is we're going to continue it if we're in person here in the fall and having the teachers do it as well, but just pretty simple, just like I said, a simple form, a simple sheet. And so then we can kind of compare if we do have to go back virtual at some point, the parents will be a little bit familiar. We'll have some of the data already from the school, so we can use that to compare in the different settings. I had some awesome teachers that really just came up with some good ideas. So I'll try to find those and then share those as well.
Okay, great, thank you.
I'm looking at the chat box and see the information from Shelley. I'm thinking that you're kind of prompting maybe some topics that could be included in our next meeting. Okay, great. So just those considerations of health and safety and how we can think through those specifically for the role of special education teachers, it looks like.
Well, and also I'm appreciating in that question, and I am putting all of this in our agenda for things to talk about and try to provide resource for at our next meeting, but that brings up some interesting conversation around least restrictive environment and some of those other, basic special education tendencies that we still have to adhere to even within these new environments. So I appreciate that, that comment very much. I copied the whole thing and pasted it in so we can think about that and discuss it.
I think we're probably ready to wrap up. Trisha, do you want to do our picture and then we can do the final communicate, make sure you guys have all our communication information?
Yes, let's do the communication piece real quick first, so that if people want to jump off and not be on for the picture, they can do that.
Well, I wasn't giving them a choice, but I guess your answer. And I was also gonna, so there's our communication, Trisha can go over that. And I did not, I failed to when I was introducing Lee to, hopefully you guys saw our email and our post that he was our spotlight of the last kind of July, looking at our school psychologists that are exhibiting those domains within this COVID time, and he's done a really good job of continuing to advocate for school psychology and during this time, and really COVID hasn't deterred him at all, which is excellent. So thank you, Lee.
Okay, so real quick, if we've written all those comments down for our next meeting, but if you guys think of any more, please email the OSPA communications@gmail.com with those, or with any other resources that you have found that you'd like to share out, or just really any kind of communication that you want to provide to us. We put down both Erica and I's contact information at the State Department if you have any crisis related questions or would like to provide that to your district if your district does have a crisis situation occur and you might need some resources for. And then the last little bullet point is our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram accounts. So go follow us on those. Again, our next meeting is the 22nd, and we're going to be rock stars. So I love to see all your wigs and your fun makeup at that one. And that'll be the last one that we know of until we might have more. We haven't decided on that yet. The Spotlight School Psychologist nominations are still open. We're still doing those. And so we will provide a link in the email that we send out with all of this information, so you can nominate yourself or someone else. And then that's everything I have. So if I'm going to give people about 2 minutes or so to jump off if you'd like to, or stay on and turn your video on so that we can take a picture.